The old man's knees hit the pavement before anyone moved. It was a Tuesday morning in late October, the kind of cold that settles into Sudbury like it owns the place. Gray sky, frost on the windshields, the smell of wood smoke and diesel mixing in the air. The parking lot outside the Northgate convenience store was mostly empty at that hour. A few cars, a flatbed truck idling near the pumps, and 4 men standing over someone who had no business being on the ground. Theo Cardinal saw it from across the street. He was 23 years old, Métis, working a split shift at the auto parts warehouse 2 blocks east. He had 40 minutes before he needed to clock in. He had been heading to grab coffee and maybe a breakfast sandwich if he had enough on his card. He was not looking for trouble. He never was. But the man on the ground, gray-haired, heavy jacket with a Veterans of Canada patch on the left shoulder, was trying to get up and couldn't, because one of the 4 men kept pushing him back down with a boot to the shoulder, not a kick, worse than a kick. The lazy, contemptuous kind of push that says, I don't even need to try. The man's name was Raymond Okafor. He was 67 years old, a retired infantry sergeant who had done 2 tours and come home with a bad hip and a worse memory for certain years. He had stopped at the Northgate to buy milk. He had said something. Witnesses would later disagree on exactly what, but the general agreement was that it had been nothing. It had been a comment about the weather or about the parking or about nothing at all. And 4 young men had decided that was enough reason. Theo stopped walking. He stood at the edge of the curb and looked at the 4 of them, looked at the man on the pavement, looked at the woman behind the store's glass door who was not coming out, and the driver of the flatbed who had found something very interesting to study in his side mirror, and the teenager near the air pump who had his phone up but was filming, not calling. Nobody moved. Theo crossed the street. He didn't run. He walked at the same pace he always walked, which his mother used to say looked like a man who had somewhere to be and wasn't going to be rushed about getting there. He came around the front of a parked Civic and stopped about 4 feet from the nearest man. Hey, he said, just that, just the word. The 4 of them turned. The one who had been doing the pushing, tall, maybe 25, wearing a Carhartt jacket with the collar popped against the cold, looked Theo over once, the way people do when they're deciding whether someone is a problem or a performance. Keep walking, he said. I don't think so, Theo said. The math was not good. Theo was 5'10" and lean. He worked in a warehouse and had done so for 2 years, so he was stronger than he looked, but he was not a fighter. He had been in one actual fight in his life, in grade 10, and he had not won it. He was aware of all of this standing there in that parking lot. His hands were not shaking, which surprised him a little later when he thought about it. They just weren't. You First Nations? One of the others said. He said it the way some people say it, like a category, like a file folder. Métis. Now help him up. The tall one stepped forward. He was maybe 2 inches taller than Theo and considerably wider. He stopped close enough that Theo could see the cold reddened skin on his jaw. You're going to walk away, the tall one said, or you're going to wish you had. Theo looked past him at Raymond, who had gotten one hand flat on the ground and was trying again to push himself upright. The old man's jaw was set. He wasn't asking for help, and he wasn't crying, and he wasn't saying anything. He was just trying to get up off the ground with whatever was left of his dignity, and the boot had come down on his shoulder again. Something settled in Theo's chest. Not anger, exactly. Something quieter and colder than anger. I said help him up. What happened in the next few seconds was short and not cinematic. There was no dramatic music, no slow motion. Theo stepped into the tall man's space, got a hand on his jacket, and moved him sideways with a leverage that surprised them both. The tall man stumbled. One of the others reached for Theo's arm, and Theo shook him off. He went to Raymond and got a hand under the old man's arm and pulled. Raymond Okafor came up off the pavement. He was heavier than Theo expected, and there was a moment of near comedy where they both almost went down again, but they didn't. They stayed up. Theo kept his hand on the old man's arm and turned to face the 4 of them. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the tall one spat on the ground near Theo's foot, not on it, near it, which was its own kind of statement about recalculation, and said something to the others, and they left. They walked to a truck on the far side of the lot and got in and drove away. The teenager with the phone was still filming. Raymond Okafor insisted he was fine. He said this 3 times, standing in the parking lot, brushing at his jacket like he was removing evidence of the morning. His hip was bothering him. Theo could see that in the way he redistributed his weight, but the old man's face was composed, and his voice was level, and he was not interested in being seen as someone who needed help. "You want me to call anyone?" Theo asked. "I want you to tell me your name," Raymond said. Theo told him. Raymond nodded slowly, like he was filing it somewhere. "Cardinal," he said. "I knew some cardinals in Timmins. You from Timmins?" "Sudbury born," Theo said. Raymond looked at the store, then back at Theo. "They're not going to do much," he said, meaning the store, meaning the camera footage, meaning the general apparatus of official response. He said it without bitterness, just as a statement of experience. "No," Theo agreed. Raymond looked at him for another moment. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know," Theo said. He bought his coffee and his breakfast sandwich. He clocked in at the warehouse with 4 minutes to spare. His supervisor, a square-built man named Hebert, who communicated primarily through eyebrows, gave him a look that asked no questions, and Theo offered no answers, and the shift started. He didn't think about the parking lot much that day. There were pallets to move and an inventory system that was behaving badly, and a coworker named Justine, who kept trying to get him to sign up for a recreational hockey league he had no interest in. The day was the day. When his shift ended, he walked home to the apartment he shared with his grandmother, Cecile, who was 71 and had a hip that was also bad, and who would not be told this. Theo Cardinal had raised Theo from the age of 9, when his mother had gone into a situation she couldn't get out of quickly, and his father had been gone considerably longer than that. She ran a tight household on a fixed income, kept a garden in the summer that produced more tomatoes than 2 people could eat, and had opinions about everything from municipal snow removal to the correct way to make bannock that she would share whether asked or not. She was the best person Theo knew. He would not have said this to her face, because she would have found it sentimental, but it was true. He came home that evening to find her at the kitchen table doing a crossword, which she did in pen, and he made them both tea and told her about the parking lot. She listened without interrupting. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Did you at least get his number?" "What?" "His number. How are you supposed to know he's okay if you don't have his number?" Theo thought about this. "I didn't think about that." "No," Cecile said, and returned to her crossword. He didn't expect to see Raymond Okafor again. He thought about it sometimes. The way you think about things that are finished, not with regret, just with a sort of quiet awareness that it had happened. He'd done what he'd done because it had needed doing. That was the whole of it. 3 weeks later, on a Friday afternoon when the temperature had dropped enough that the puddles had frozen into small, pale mirrors on the sidewalk, Theo came out of the warehouse to find a man leaning against the wall near the employee exit. Raymond looked better than he had in the parking lot. He was wearing the same jacket with the veteran's patch, but he was standing straight, his weight even on both feet, hands in his pockets. He looked like a man who had arranged to be somewhere and was content to wait for however long it took. "Cardinal," he said. Theo stopped. "How did you find me?" "Asked around," Raymond said, which was not an answer and was somehow entirely believable as one. They stood in the cold for a moment. "I wanted to say thank you properly," Raymond said. "I've been thinking about how to do that." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." Raymond said it flatly, not unkindly. "I want to." He paused. "I've got some connections. Veterans networks, mostly. Some tradespeople I've known a long time. There's a mechanic program starting at Cambrian College in January, 2-year automotive technician certificate. I've talked to someone there. The registration fee is taken care of if you want it." Theo was quiet for a long time. He had wanted to be a mechanic since he was 12 years old, and his uncle had let him help rebuild a transmission on a 98 F-150. He had not gone to college because there was Cecile and there was rent, and there was the warehouse paying $18.50 an hour with a benefits package that covered her prescriptions. He had made calculations. They were not the calculations he would have chosen, but they were the ones available. "I can't afford to stop working," he said. "Evening program," Raymond said. "You'd keep the job, probably be tired for 2 years, but..." He said this last word and left it there, the way older people do when they think the rest of the sentence is self-evident. "Why?" Theo asked. Raymond looked at him steadily. "Because you stood up when nobody else did. Because you're 23 and working in a warehouse when you shouldn't have to be. And because I spent 30 years in the forces watching young men get ground down by systems that never saw them as worth much, and I have some ability now to make a call or two, and I'm going to use it." He paused. "Any other questions?" Theo didn't have any. He enrolled in January. The first semester was brutal in the way that all first semesters are when you are also working full-time and getting 5 or 6 hours of sleep on a good night. He came home to the apartment on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 10 o'clock, smelling of the shop, grease under his fingernails despite the scrubbing, and Cecile would have a plate in the oven and would not comment on the hour or the state of his hands, which was its own kind of love. He was good at it. Not just adequate, genuinely good. His shop instructor, a compact woman named Tran, who had run her own garage for 15 years before moving into teaching, told him after his first practical exam that he had a feel for it, which she said was not something you could teach and was rarer than people thought. "What does that mean?" he asked her. "It means you listen to the machine," she said. "Most people look, you listen." She handed back his exam sheet and walked away, which he took to mean the conversation was over. Raymond came to things sometimes. Not constantly. He was not the hovering type, but periodically, the way people check in when they're invested in an outcome without wanting to make it strange. He had coffee with Theo once a month or so, usually at a diner on Elm Street that had been there since the 70s and showed no signs of change. And they talked about the program and about the city and about hockey in the abstract way that men who don't particularly love hockey talk about it, as a neutral topic that carries no risk. In March, Cecile's blood pressure went sideways. It was not an emergency. She was medicated. She had a doctor she trusted. It was a matter of adjustment and monitoring. But the prescription change was expensive in a way that Theo's budget did not accommodate without some rearrangement. He didn't say anything to Raymond. He rearranged. He found out 2 months later that Raymond had called the pharmacy directly. He didn't know how Raymond had known about it. He suspected Justine from the warehouse, who had a wide social network and loose lips, but he didn't ask. He went to Raymond's house, a modest bungalow on Lorne Street, meticulously maintained, small garden in the back that was just starting to show green, and knocked on the door. "You paid for her prescriptions," Theo said when Raymond opened it. Raymond considered this. "Come in," he said. "I'll make coffee." "I'm not here for coffee." "I know. Come in anyway." Inside, the house smelled like cedar and coffee and old books. There were photographs on the wall. Raymond in uniform at various ages, a woman Theo didn't recognize, children who might be grandchildren, a regiment flag in a frame, a shelf of paperbacks with cracked spines. They sat at the kitchen table. "You didn't have to do that," Theo said. Raymond looked at him across the table with an expression Theo couldn't entirely read, something between patience and something older. Something that came from a lot of years of watching people navigate pride. "I know," he said. "I wanted to." Theo was quiet for a moment. "Then why her? You don't even know her." "I know she raised you," Raymond said simply. 2 years passed the way hard years do, in distinct fragments that only form a coherent picture later, looking back. Theo finished the program. He finished it with grades that surprised no one who had been watching and surprised him more than was perhaps appropriate. Tran shook his hand at the completion ceremony and said, "Don't waste it," which was her version of a standing ovation. He had 2 job offers before the end of convocation week. One was from a dealership on the South End that paid well and had decent hours and was, in every measurable sense, a good job. The other was from a small independent garage on Paris Street, Cardinal Automotive, as it would eventually be called. Though that came later, that was looking for a certified tech to come in and over time buy into a partnership. The owner of that garage was a man named Arsenault, who had known Raymond for 20 years through the Veterans Network, and who, it turned out, had been looking for someone with exactly the combination of skills and disposition that Theo happened to have. Theo took the second offer. He was not romantic about it. He ran the numbers, talked to Cecile, talked to Raymond, and decided that the longer, harder road was the one that led somewhere he actually wanted to go. Arsenault was fair and demanding and had a clientele that had been coming to him for decades. The work was good. Theo was good at it. After 8 months, Arsenault offered him 15% of the business. After a year and a half, it was 30%. The garage did not make national news. There was no ceremony, no proclamation from the mayor or feature in the Sudbury Star or social media moment. There was just Theo Cardinal, 25 years old, Métis, who had grown up with a grandmother who raised him right in a city that mostly looked past him, unlocking the front door of a garage on Paris Street on a January morning, turning on the lights, and starting work. Cecile came to see it the first week. She stood in the bay and looked at the lifts and the tool benches and the Theo-shaped organization of it all, and she was quiet for a long time, which was not her usual state. "Your grandfather would have liked this," she said finally. Theo didn't say anything. He handed her the coffee he'd poured and went back to the car on the lift. Raymond came by most Saturdays. Not to have work done, though he eventually did start bringing the truck for its service. He came because it was nearby, and the coffee was good, and because, Theo gradually understood, the garage was one of the places in his week that felt settled. Raymond was 69 now, and the hip was worse, and the memory for certain things was getting complicated in ways neither of them spoke about directly, but he was still Raymond, still upright, still possessed of opinions on snow removal and federal politics that he would share unprompted. One Saturday in late spring, almost 3 years after the parking lot, Raymond came in and sat in the waiting area's one good chair and watched Theo work for a while. "You ever think about that morning?" Raymond asked. Theo was underneath a Subaru. "Sometimes," he said. "What do you think about?" He rolled the creeper out and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "I think about how nobody moved," he said. "There were 6 or 7 people in that lot. I counted after. And nobody moved." Raymond nodded. "I don't say that to be hard on them," Theo said. "I understand it. I understand why people don't. But I think about it." Raymond was quiet for a moment. "You know what I think about," he said. "I think about the fact that you weren't even supposed to be there. You were going for coffee. Wrong place, right time?" He paused. "Or the other way around, depending how you look at it." Theo sat up and leaned against the Subaru's door. "Does it make a difference," he said, "where you're supposed to be?" Raymond thought about this seriously, the way he thought about most things. "No," he said, "I suppose it doesn't." There is a thing that gets said sometimes about moments like that morning in the parking lot, that they're about courage, about heroism, about something extraordinary, and maybe they are. But Theo Cardinal, if you asked him, would tell you something different. He'd tell you it was just a decision. One of 1,000 decisions a person makes about who they are before anyone is watching. The kind of decision you make about whether to give someone your full attention or half of it. Whether you tell the truth when a small lie would be easier. Whether you cross a parking lot when a cold morning gives you every reason not to. The moment didn't make him who he was. He was already who he was. The moment just made it visible. Cecile Cardinal still does her crossword in pen. She still has opinions about Bannock. The garden produces more tomatoes than 2 people can eat, and Theo takes some to the garage and leaves them in the waiting area, with a sign that says help yourself, and people do. Raymond Okafor still comes on Saturdays. The coffee is still good. I keep thinking about that parking lot in October. The frozen breath, the sound of a boot on an old man's shoulder, and 6 or 7 people who found reasons not to move. I'm not here to judge them. I've stood still before too, in my own ways, in my own moments. But I think about what Theo did, and more than what he did, I think about why he was able to do it. He didn't wake up that morning planning to be brave. He was going for coffee. He had 40 minutes and a shift to catch and a card he wasn't sure had enough on it. The morning gave him every excuse, and he crossed the street anyway. That doesn't come from nowhere. That comes from being raised in a way that makes certain things non-negotiable, not as rules you follow, but as things you simply are. Cecile Cardinal raised a boy who didn't need an audience to know right from wrong. That's the first thing, and I think it's the most important one. The character you build in the ordinary days, in the small decisions nobody notices, is the only character you actually have when a real moment arrives. You can't manufacture it on the spot. Theo had it because he'd been living it long before that parking lot. Part 2. The years at Cambrian, the shop work, the practical exams. The instructor who told him he listened to machines the way most people only look at them. Theo didn't just have good intentions. He had real ability, built through real effort, and he'd built it even when the system around him hadn't made it easy, even when the calculations pointed away from college and toward the warehouse and staying put. He kept learning anyway. That kind of persistent curiosity, the determination to actually get good at something even when it costs you, is what turned Raymond's offer into something Theo could use. An opportunity only matters if you're capable of meeting it. And then there's the part that gets overlooked. The 2 years of evening classes on top of full-time shifts. The getting home at 10 o'clock smelling like the shop. The not quitting when it would have been entirely reasonable to quit. Theo didn't have a safety net. He had Cecile's crossword and a plate in the oven, and the understanding that she had already done hard things so that he could do harder ones. That's a kind of inheritance that doesn't show up on any balance sheet. He honored it by not folding. What strikes me most, looking at the whole arc of it, is how cause and effect actually worked here. Theo didn't stand up in that parking lot because he expected anything in return. He stood up because it was the right thing, and he was the kind of person who did the right thing. Raymond didn't help Theo because of some transaction. He did it because one honest act in a cold parking lot reminded a 67-year-old man that there were still young people worth investing in. And Cecile didn't raise Theo hoping for some future payoff. She raised him because she loved him and because she knew that who you are matters more than what you have. None of it was calculated, all of it connected. That's the thing about living with integrity, doing the decent thing, building real skill, and staying the course when it's hard. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a guarantee. It just accumulates quietly until one morning in October, it turns out to be exactly what's needed. The coffee at Cardinal Automotive is still good, I'm told. Raymond comes on Saturdays. Some things end up exactly where they belong.